Welcome to CivilNet. My guest today is Dr. Mikael Zolyan. Dr. Zolyan is a political analyst and also a member of the My Step Alliance, and he will become a deputy in Armenia's new parliament. Welcome, Mr. Zolyan. So today I am talking to you as a researcher. My Step Alliance will get the majority of the parliament seats as a result of the elections of December 9. And acting Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan will most probably be appointed as Prime Minister. What are the most urgent reforms and challenges that the new government will be facing?
Well, I don't know to what extent I can separate myself as a member of My Step Alliance from myself being an analyst, but of course I will try. Well, the challenges are the same challenges that we have been facing for a long time, and obviously there are the internal challenges, there are the external challenges. Externally, Armenia is in a very difficult setting, and this is, it's not new. We have the Karabakh conflict, Armenia-Turkey relations. We have complicated situation in this Eurasian structures, including the CSTO and Eurasian Economic Union, which is getting more complicated because of the current confrontation between Russia and the West, and our foreign policy basically throughout the post-Soviet history of Armenia has been to try to develop relations with all actors, whether in the West, in the East, in the North, etc. So that's going to be quite complicated, and internally we have many challenges. The previous governments have left Armenia in a, I don't want to use the word devastated, but devastated state, but I don't know how else you can put it. I mean, Armenia is if you leave Yerevan and go to even some, 50 or do 50 miles outside of Yerevan, it seems that there was a war somewhere here. You have. And the further you go away from Yerevan, the more you see the state of the country. The roads, the buildings, there are no jobs, people are poor, a lot of people have left the country to work somewhere else, so some have left for good, and obviously it's not going to be easy to rebuild all that, but I think there's also a lot of optimism. The most important thing that the system of corruption and what I call the mafia state, or you could call it capture of the state, when this has been dismantled. In Armenia, we've had for years, I can say for decades, we had a system of government which was not really about governing the country, but about basically stealing the resources from the country. It was, it doesn't really matter what ideology was used to cover it up, but it was basically a mafia which was just, soaking the juices from the people of the country, and this system has been dismantled. Of course, there's going to be a process. It can't be done in 1 month or 2 months. So we still have to continue this process, and we have to make sure that the system cannot regenerate at some point. And we call it fight against the corruption, but I think it's much wider than that, and it's much deeper than that. Because fight against the corruption is when somebody does their work and they also take a bribe or something. But the previous system was completely based on this. The goal of the system was to extract resources from the country and from the population. So this has been changed by the fact of the revolution already. So the system is no longer in place, but we have to make sure that it cannot emerge again. And of course, we have to make sure that there is economic progress, because corruption obviously was not the only thing that was hindering the progress, and I personally believe it was the main issue, but it wasn't the only issue. So if you look at the My Step Alliance program, there are a lot of points about the economic policies, changing the tax system, about trying to bring more investment to Armenia. There's also we are talking now about making the government system more efficient, because for a small country like Armenia, we have a very inflated government structure. There are a lot of government employees, there are a lot of government institutions. There are these institutions which are sort of in the gray zone, which it's not clear if it's a government institution or not. There are a lot of which were created basically because it was assumed that government institutions are not efficient. So to implement certain programs, for example, World Bank or IMF or whatever, you needed all these different institutions which are sort of in the gray zone, which are neither completely government nor they are private. So we also have to reevaluate that and to see whether we need them or not. So there's a lot of work to do, but I think there's a general mode of optimism in the society, and the most important thing is that the people themselves, they are active and they come up with initiatives and they want to do things. So I liked what Nikol Pashinyan was saying about the next steps when he was comparing it to the revolution. What he was saying that when the revolution happened, it wasn't us who made the revolution. It was the people of Armenia who, they themselves came out and they did the revolution. And what we did was only creating the setting for that. So the same thing is going to happen now. I mean, the government's government's job is not to do everything itself. Its job is to create the setting and the conditions for the people of Armenia to step forward and to make the economic revolution, which Pashinyan is talking about now.
You talked about the Karabakh issue. The Karabakh region is in conflict with Azerbaijan, and this conflict is one of the most important issues. Part of the population wonders if the new government will be able to manage this issue. Will there be any policy shift in the Karabakh issue?
Well, obviously, Karabakh issue, or if we use the name of the republic, Artsakh Republic, the issue of Artsakh issue is very important, and obviously it is directly related to security and the security of the population of Artsakh, the security of Armenia, of the Republic of Armenia. So you cannot have very radical shifts in this issue because it's going to be dangerous. So we have to make sure that our policies are very careful, and at this point we have to ensure that we have to try to solve issues which are realistic. It is impossible to solve the Karabakh issue in a week or in a month or in a day or in a year or 2 years. So it will take a long time. What is possible and what is realistic to do now is to create a more or less peaceful situation on the borders and on the line of contact in Artsakh, because in the last years we have seen, prior to the revolution, we have seen an increase in incidents, in different provocations on the border, and of course the high point of that was the April war in 2016, the 4-day war. So after that there was a bit of a decrease in the tension, but still it was quite tense. And the issue for us at this point is to deal with this situation and to create an atmosphere in which you can actually talk to the other side, because in a situation when the other side is talking about Yerevan being a historical Azerbaijani territory and bringing it back and using this militant rhetoric, it is impossible to have a meaningful dialogue or a meaningful conversation or meaningful negotiations, whatever you call them. And another issue is the participation of Republic of Artsakh, which the new government of Armenia has raised, because and it has been sometimes perceived as a sort of radical rhetoric, and this shows how the previous governments of Armenia have mishandled the issue, because when you're saying something which is completely logical and just common sense, that the Republic of Artsakh has to be at the negotiation table, and this is perceived by the outside world as radical rhetoric, it means that the previous governments of Armenia have done a very bad job presenting our position on the conflict and just presenting the reality of the conflict, because the very idea that you can have meaningful negotiations without representatives of Artsakh is absurd. But when you are saying that, this is perceived as radical rhetoric, because the previous governments of Armenia have basically created a situation in which Artsakh is not seen as a player, Artsakh is not seen as an autonomous entity. It is seen as some kind of part of the international community is unfortunately refusing to allow Artsakh at the negotiation table, listening to the position of Azerbaijan, which is not, I understand why Azerbaijan has this position, but why should the mediators subscribe to this position? So we need to change that, but obviously this also cannot happen in a day or a month or even a year, so we understand this is not a precondition for continuing the dialogue. And Pashinyan has stated very clearly that Republic of Armenia is ready to negotiate with Republic of Azerbaijan on the issues that are related to the Republic of Armenia. But Republic of Armenia cannot negotiate on the final status of Republic of Artsakh, because this is up to Republic of Artsakh, and so on. So to sum up, I think the aim at this point is to be realistic, to stop the incidents on the border, to stop the escalation of militant rhetoric, to create an atmosphere. Obviously, there cannot be mutual trust, but at least there can be some steps in that direction. So this is the goal at this point.
We talked also about, you said if you go out of Yerevan some miles away, you'll see the situation outside of Yerevan. And I have some numbers too. In Armenia, 766,000 people live, or 25.7% of the population live in poverty, and among them, 42,000 live in extreme poverty. We also know that Armenia, the country, suffers from depopulation. How should the government address these challenges?
Well, obviously the government is working, will be working, and it is working in this direction. And obviously the first thing to do is to create jobs. To create jobs, you have to bring investment, and there is potential for investment. I mean, in the previous system, it was both for people who lived in Armenia and people from abroad who wanted to invest in Armenia, but were not connected to the government. It was very difficult to do. Simply, if you wanted to invest in Armenia and it was any significant investment, everybody knew that the rules of the game were that you had to go to some influential people in the government, talk to them, maybe give them a share in your business, and only then you could open a business. Otherwise, you would have to deal with all kinds of restrictions. I mean, if it was a small business, probably it was okay, but if you wanted to go beyond certain level, it was very difficult to do. And in the new situation, we are, the new government's job is to guarantee that there will be absolutely equal conditions for all investments. There will be, all investments will be protected by the law. In this sense, it is very important also to have an independent court system, which obviously, again, it won't happen in a day or two, but this is a process which is moving. And again, the most important thing is that there is this feeling of optimism in the country, which also comes from the fact that people realize that the government is no longer going to prevent them from doing something. A big problem in the past was, you could always find people who had some initiatives, who had some ideas, and when they actually ran into the bureaucracy, into the corruption, they just gave up and they left, or they started doing something else. So this is what we are going to do to deal with now. And well, part of it is already dealt with, because the revolution, it took away this corrupt mafia which was controlling the state institution, but there's still more jobs to do. There's a lot of bureaucratic regulations that have to be abolished or made more simple, made simpler. There are a lot of legal changes that need to happen. There's probably a need to do some kind of, to market the country better for investors. And also, I think in this sense, it is important that the messages that we are seeing in Pashinyan's and his team's speeches, that it's not just about the big guys, the big companies who want to make a big investment. It's also about the small business, the medium business, because I think that's where now Pashinyan's team sees the potential for the development. And this is a big change from the previous government, where it was all about this big several monopolies which control everything, and the small business, medium business was in a very disadvantaged condition.
But it's also about decentralizing from Yerevan, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's all connected. It's all related. I think it's when when you start dealing with one thing, then obviously all the other issues are coming, and it's. But also the good part is when you start fixing one thing, then the other things are also being that you start a chain reaction.
Also, we'll talk a little bit more about you, because since we started this interview, you talked with the we, so it was hard for you to separate from your new job as a deputy. You are an active representative of the civil society, and what was your motivation behind your decision to become a member of the parliament?
Well, I'm not a member of parliament yet, and there is. Well, I will become, but I don't know when. So because it's a very complicated system in Armenia, and also you have to wait when certain people from the parliament go to the government, and then the next people on the list, they go further and so on. So I don't want to go to that, but my motivation was precisely what you mentioned. It's hard for me to separate myself from the political force that has come to power as a result of the revolution, because I share their goals, because I share the values that it's based on, and I do want them to succeed. So it would be very difficult for me to remain an analyst and to maintain this kind of removed position. So of course I'm trying to be objective, I'm trying to be unbiased, but at the same time I do want this force to succeed, because I think the success of this political force would be the success of everybody in Armenia. And what is more important, probably the failure of this political force will be the failure of everybody in Armenia. And there are a lot of challenges, and I feel that if I'm closer to the decision makers, then maybe I can help more, even though it's not very clear. I mean, you could also argue that as an analyst, maybe I could have more influence. I don't know. So it's a choice you have to make, and there are people in the civil society who had this opportunity to go into politics and go into the government, and they chose not to do it. And I can't say that this is somehow, I can't say this is the right choice and this is the wrong choice. I mean, it would be also not very good if everybody from the civil society just left and went to the government, because we do need civil society as a watchdog, and we do need this is, it would be very dangerous if sort of the Armenian society now goes into this mindset that, okay, we have elected the new government, it's up to them to do everything, and we can just relax and go to our everyday activities, which I don't think we have this mood now. I mean, people are still very active. They're discussing things. They have everywhere I go, I see people who come to me and say, "Oh, we know you're going to be in the new parliament, so here is my, this is what I think about this issue." People are sending me suggestions. People are sending me articles they wrote about what has to be done and so on. So you do feel this in the society, that there's an awakening, a civic awakening, or you could say political awakening in the society. And I hope this will continue, because 130 people in the new parliament, or no matter how many people there are in the government, they are not going to be able to change the country. It's up to the whole society, the whole population, all the citizens of the Republic of Armenia to change the country that we live in. Obviously, the government has a very important job in that, but the government alone cannot do that.
Thank you, Mr. Zolyan, for this talk. Thank you for watching, and continue to follow CivilNet.